Welcome to episode number 41 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I'm so grateful you've joined us. So what do you do when you're a first responder and you're struggling and making bad decisions at work, and you realize this just is not working out for you? That's where Russ Hanes was at after 17 years of working in law enforcement, corrections, and in 911 dispatch. Fortunately for Russ, he was able to finally get his life back together, but it meant leaving the job he loved. But he still wanted to help people, so he launched the Invisible Wounds Project, a nonprofit that helps improve the lives and mental health of veterans, first responders, and their families. Today we'll hear a little bit more about his story and about an innovative new initiative his nonprofit is launching this month. So stay tuned for his story. Hey, if you're enjoying this podcast and if you listen on a regular basis and think others should too, be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends and family and coworkers. Our mission is to bring you content that inspires you to develop a culture of wellness so that all first responders can thrive and have a successful and meaningful life, because I believe that wellness is not optional for all of us. So whether you watch on YouTube or listen on your favorite audio app, please subscribe, and I'll be ever grateful. Thanks again for listening and watching, and now here's my conversation with Russ Hanes. Russ, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so glad we're able to connect and have you on the program today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this.
So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about what's your connection with first responders and what's your story?
Okay, so I worked as, now I'm the founder and executive director of the Invisible Wounds Project. But prior to that, I spent 17 years working in law enforcement, public safety. I ran the gamut. I was a reserve officer. I was a community service officer. I was a police officer. I was corrections. I was juvenile corrections, and then finished out the last 17 years as 10 and a half years of that was as a 911 dispatcher.
So you've kind of seen a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. So I've seen and heard a lot of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So how did those things affect you when you were in law enforcement on the street doing the things? How did that affect you, mentally, spiritually, health-wise? Kind of what was the overall effect on you, on you personally?
Well, it was draining. I kind of look back now and I go, one, I think I'd be a way better cop now than I was when I was, 25, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get into it and you've got these rose-colored glasses of what you think the job is going to be and what you think you're going to do. And then the reality is that's not what it truly always is.
Mm-hmm.
What you think you're going to do is about 5% of what the job actually is. And, sometimes it's just surviving all the other stuff. And that's really where, the job lies. Right. And I think, on the cop side of it, being a cop is to me is a younger person's game, because of all the physical stuff and all those things that you have to do. But mentally, you're way better off as by the time you're mid 30s, then you finally actually understand what the heck's going on with life,
Well, it's all that experience. I mean, it's like that in filmmaking too. If I knew now, when I went out to make my first documentary, I might have won an Oscar for that one, because I know so much more.
Yeah. Well, and as a young person, you're like, I know it. I went to school. I got this. You're just old and set in your ways, but there's a lot of wisdom that I think that those more salt and pepper senior people have that I think as younger people, we don't grasp and we don't listen and we don't think it's going to happen. It's not going to be that way for us. We're smarter than that. We're better than that. In the reality that is indeed what truly does happen. I also see our, in the public safety professions, we really do eat our young. A lot of times too, where we we hold them to a standard that is unrealistic. We think that, we forget how far we've come in 15 years a lot of times. But yeah, so I mean, as a police officer, in the grand scheme of things, I was a police officer much less time than I was, and even corrections than I was 911 dispatch. And truly, a lot of my trauma really came from being a 911 dispatcher.
So how did that transition, kind of what was the difference of stress that you had from being a police officer to now being at the console?
I think it was just more intense too. So I worked in busy areas, whether I was a police officer, whether I was a 911 dispatcher, but as a 911 dispatcher, you just never had any time you didn't have a lot of time to digest or to recover from one call before you went on to the next. And you really never found out what was going on or what the outcomes were. And I know you don't get that in a lot of professions, like the full outcome, but so often, I mean, I could tell you on my two hands, the outcome of thousands of calls that I took.
Wow.
And you just never got that closure. And you'd go from taking a shooting and managing a shooting or a stabbing or a violent incident or a very critical incident to, 5 minutes later, you're dealing with something totally different. Where I worked, we didn't have scheduled breaks. So we'd have a dozen people in the room and you had to pretty much call dibs on going to the bathroom because you could only have one person out at a time. So you'd go to the bathroom. Well, first you'd go to the fridge and you'd heat up your food. And then while it was in the microwave, you'd run to the bathroom, go to the bathroom, go get your stuff, and then come back. Unless you smoked, because then somehow those people always got way more smoke breaks and they got more time. Which isn't good for their health either.
Sure.
So, but that was the deal. So like, it was just, you just never had time to digest a lot, no matter where you came in at the beginning of the shift, you could be calm, cool, collected, and everything's chill. Well, after taking 125 calls in a shift, by the time that was done, you were wired up, so, and I look at like my time. So I started in dispatch in 2006 and I didn't have kids at that time. So, and my wife was an ER nurse. So she worked overnights. I worked overnights. That worked out, well for us. We'd have more time off together. And then we intermixed kids then starting in 2009, that became part of the equation. And, so that she could, take time off and then also, we could save money on babysitting and on daycare. We kind of worked opposite shifts. So she was a day shift. She could get day shift. I couldn't. So I'd work like a 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift. Well, if 3 a.m. and she's going in at, I can't remember if it was, 11 or 9, but she had to get up earlier and get going. So if I got off at 3 and was home by 3:30, well, it's not like I could just fall right into bed. So maybe I got to bed at 4:30, and then you're up by 9. So you're always running short on sleep when you're on. And that starts to wear on you. And pretty soon you become more irritable and all this stuff goes on. And, the gamut of all the stuff you're dealing with just kind of snowballs. And if you're not doing healthy things to take care of burning that stress off, and you have, it just starts to build. And in 2011, I took part in a study with, I think it's 2011, maybe it was 2012, Northern Illinois University. They did and I think we've talked about this off air.
Yeah.
There was a PTSD with 911 dispatch study, and I took part in that. And basically I checked every box. I still didn't really deal with it at that point. In 2013, then I left the agency I was with and went to greener pastures and, brighter grass and a little bit, more money. And I thought that was the cure. Turns out that was nice for the first 6 months. But ultimately I still had not dealt with my stuff. And,
because you were bringing you with you, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're still bringing you got the trailer full of crap behind you, and it's just, you're moving out, but you still got all the baggage. So, never dealt with it. 2015, I kind of, things had really hit rock bottom at that point. And, I remember specifically, it was somewhere in like October, November. I looked around the dispatch room and I said, if I don't figure stuff out, do something different, make some kind of major change, I'm not going to be here. At that point, I was no longer, I wasn't a good dad. I wasn't a good husband. I was no longer a good employee. Apparently they frown upon, saying things on the air that you shouldn't say. And, and those were all warning signs that, if you look back and so you look back at it and you go, okay, well, those were all warning signs that other people should have seen, but they're not all seeing that same warning sign. They're not all seeing that red flag. But I was. I recognized that red flag, all those red flags. And in fact, when I go speak, I put a checklist up, and I have, I don't know, it's like 17 boxes, and I have highlighted certain boxes. And I think like 13 of the 17 boxes I have highlighted. And I'll ask people, what do you think those boxes were? Why do you think those are highlighted? And I get various answers, and those were all of mine. That's what I had. That's what I was experiencing. That's what I was dealing with. And, so getting out of it, I had to. I had to get out of it. I still love it. I still miss it. But now I'm able to do something different and hopefully help a lot of other people be able to continue in their careers and doing what they love by taking action before it gets to that crisis point where
what are some of the things that you did to kind of work through that checklist to kind of solve some of those problems?
One, I had to remove myself completely from the source of that trauma, which was dispatch. Constant stress, constant anger. And I looked at, like I said, back in November of 2015, just before I left, which I left in February of 2016. I looked around and said, if I don't leave here, if I don't do something different, I'm going to be dead. So what do I like to do? And so Invisible Wounds Project spawned from a charity car, truck, and motorcycle cruise that I had organized starting in 2009. And it was a way to give back to veteran organizations. And it was a way to pay tribute to my dad, who was a Vietnam vet, and just do something meaningful. I loved doing that. At that point in 2015, I was probably volunteering about 800 hours a year just to put that one single day event on. So part of my process sitting there, I'm going, I work 800 hours a year volunteering for one day that is meaningful to me. And that clearly is bringing me joy. I don't make a dime doing that. So how do I turn that into something that I can get paid for? And so I started working. So in February, or actually it was March 1st, I think, is when I started officially full time. But I started working in radio sales. I liked doing sales, marketing. I liked connecting people. I liked how to bring things together, how to see successful outcomes. Those are all things that I did on the nonprofit side, but that's also part of who I was as a dispatcher and as a public safety person. I like to create positive outcomes for people. I think at the core, when we talk about, well, why did you get into, whether it's being a cop or corrections officer or dispatcher, any of the first responders or veteran roles or whatever. It's ultimately people who join those ranks have servants' hearts. They are there to serve, and that's probably the majority of people. That's what's part of their core. And so I found like, hey, I like to do things that serve other people in some way. And so I got into the radio sales. I started doing that, ended up meeting some people that led to me starting a marketing company with partners. But I still then ran what became Invisible Wounds Project at that. In 2018, we made it an official nonprofit. I still volunteered, with it, a lot of time, 800 hours a year, probably. I would say I spent almost as much time volunteering once it started really getting going in the 2019, 2020 as I did actually working. Right. So I worked with clients, but if I had a client for Invisible Wounds Project where we were, we're helping veterans, police, fire, EMS, frontline medical staff, corrections, dispatch, and then their families. If I had one of them call and I was, and needed help, but I was working on a marketing client, well, I would drop what was going on with the marketing client to go over and make sure that like those people that we serve and our servants were good.
How did you figure out that, you kind of had a purpose for many years, in law enforcement and in 911 dispatch? You had that purpose of serving your community through those channels. So how did you figure out that you may be good at sales, in the radio business, and how was that a shift in purpose for you?
Well, so because in 2009, when I started the car, truck, motorcycle cruise, which is now called Cruise for Heroes, I was pretty much the only one doing that. I was running it. So I had to find businesses. I had to find sponsors. I had to find donors. We did a silent auction. We had to find businesses that would cooperate with us and partner with us for the cruise itself, but then also to sponsor the cruise and make it possible. Because, it started with 12 cars in a parking lot and about 25 people. It grew into where we've had up to 1,000 cars, trucks, bikes, and semis and stuff like that, and thousands of people at that one event. Now we have it. It's a 3-part event, and it is, you got a 5K, Officer Sean Silvera Memorial 5K. We've got the Cruise for Heroes, and then we have Freedom Fest, which is a country concert on the racetrack at Running Aces Casino. So I realize that not everybody is good at connecting with businesses and being able to have that connection and being capable of making the ask. Not everybody has that personality to say, look, this is what we need from you. This is why, and we want you to come on board.
So how long did it take for you to, once you came out of 911, before your mind started perhaps even healing, from the stuff that you experienced back there? What was that process like?
I would say it was a good 2 years. There was a 2-year period where it was like I was spinning tires, and then I'd grip, and then I'd spin tires. I was driving out of the ditch, trying to keep it straight, but you'd get sideways, and that's honestly what we see in a lot of our clients for Invisible Wounds Project. We see so many that there's so many ups and downs. It's a roller coaster, because one minute you think you're doing great, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, that it pops up. And as someone who lives with PTSD, there's still days where things happen, and you find yourself angry over nothing, or that's one of my things for sure. Or you find yourself feeling like you just are not enough, and that, you need to do more, you have to be doing more. And, it's a constant battle, and you have to keep moving forward. But it really did take 2 years.
What motivated you in those 2 years, and even now, what motivates you to keep moving forward in the direction that you're heading?
Being a better person. I want to be a better person than I was last week. I'm trying to improve. Not always easy. Sometimes I screw up. Working on that. Trying to get beyond. Accepting that I'm never going to be perfect, and that this is a part of me, and then understanding what triggers things. Right? It's a constant learning curve, because we think we have things figured out, and then certain things happen, and it causes us to have setbacks. So it's really constantly moving forward, wanting to help myself, but help others, and then wanting to be a good role model for my kids, and show them that even though I do struggle, I can battle through it and still accomplish great things that, help other people.
If you could go back now to your younger self, perhaps when you were just starting in 911, what would you tell yourself then?
Take care of yourself. Don't try to, I think we try to prove ourselves so much, like prove how good we are to other people so much that, and how tough we are. And we don't let our true selves out. We mask that. I think we mask it for protection, because it's just, the first responder world can sometimes be a pretty cruel world too. I don't think it's always intentional. I think part of it is that survival. That's how we survive too, is beating others down a little bit. But I think being true to yourself and taking care of yourself that's paramount. Don't wait to take care of yourself. So, we look at like, if you only change, we have the checkup from the neck up, right? That's becoming pretty common across the country. So for 1 hour a year, we send our first responders in to get a checkup with a therapist. And the way those work, they're not required to talk about anything in particular. It's just, hey, we want you in the office to talk to somebody once a year. You can talk about baseball and the weather or whatever. It's a good first step. But if we only change the oil in our car once a year, how well is that car going to run? Not very well. It's not going to last. And that's it. So if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't exercise our mind, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through hobbies, whether it's through getting out of the muck that is the job, if we don't do that, we're eventually going to have an engine failure.
I was at a symposium yesterday, and they were talking about that very thing, where in the state of Maryland here, they just mandated that all law enforcement now have to once a year get like a checkup from the neck up, as you said. And someone in the room said that they had some people ask them, well, do we need to be honest when we're talking to the therapist? Yeah. And so that can be an issue. If I'm going to come in and sit in front of a therapist every, once a year, am I just going to talk about the weather, or am I going to really be true to what I need to do and talk about the things that I'm facing?
Right. And that's kind of, so when we developed Invisible Wounds Project, that was exactly why we developed it the way we did. We kind of operate as, on the mental health side, as sort of a third party EAP. So if you're really in the tank, and what we've experienced is the people who are really struggling, they don't want to go to their supervisor. They don't want to go to their department and say, hey, I'm struggling, because in a lot of places, that's not going to be. A lot of places are still in the spot where they're going to look at that and go, okay, well, you're not fit for duty. We're going to have to take your, if you're a cop, we're going to have to take your gun. You're going to go into the office. And then unfortunately, a lot of times what's also happening with that, and I hate to say that on a wellness podcast, but it's the reality. A lot of departments are still old school, and they go, okay, now we're going to put them on a light duty desk, assignment. And then pretty soon, what then ends up happening is then all of a sudden someone who had a spotless record for 15 years is now getting disciplined for something completely just benign. And that is them starting to create a paper trail. And not every department is like this, but there are, I've lost count of how many are. And, a lot of times when I speak in front of department heads or chiefs or anything like that, how you treat the first person or the people that do step up and ask for help is critically important to your success with mental health. Because if you don't treat people who are coming forward and asking for help properly, those others that are on the department that are in the same boat as they are not going to come forward if they see you treating their other partners poorly, they're not coming forward.
Of course.
Those are the ones who are going to end up dying of suicide or having massive crisis because they now know where you stand and that you're not going to support them or support their healing at all. And when, I was talking with a veteran here locally, DJ, and he said, he's been, I think it was 4 or 5 deployments. He's an active vet. He said when he first deployed, I think it was 2003, 2004, when he came back, it was basically, their reintegration process was, hey, don't go spend all your time at the bar. Right. So that was the beginning of Iraq, Afghanistan. Now subsequently, after 4 or 5 deployments, he's diagnosed with PTSD. Their reintegration process is totally different. Their support is totally different in the military. They understand their goal is to try to keep people active. So they work hard and they do spend money on the services that way. What I have seen in the last, I would say since I got out in 2016, there was no resources. There's still almost no resources. And there's very little understanding that what our military goes through is exactly analogous to what our police, fire, EMS, our critical care nurses, our dispatchers, our corrections officers, what they're going through. And that PTSD rate and the suicide rate that we know is in veterans just hasn't been studied properly in all of those other lines. But based on my experience in who we're working with, and we had over 400 intakes last year, I would say we're exactly on par. Our veterans and first responders are dealing with the same mental health crisis, just not the same level of resources. And really, I would even say on the veteran side, the resources that are there, so much of it is once you're in crisis, then we'll help, right? Well, we don't help on the mental health side until it's a crisis situation. Yeah. We don't put enough resources into it ahead of time to keep people healthy on the mental side. If we look at mental health the same way we do as our physical health, physical health is 25 centuries ahead of where our mental health is.
Yeah. We exercise, we take vitamins, we do all these things to prevent us from getting sick or injuries. We all do all those things, but what do we do to prevent our brain from having an injury? Right. Yeah.
We kind of shut down, right? So as soon as we go into lockdown mode and isolation, which only furthers the problem. We don't let people in. We don't connect. We don't use the resources that are available. and we get really suspicious of anyone that wants to try to help.
So you kind of alluded to having an organization that you guys help, veterans and first responders. So talk about that. And I know you're doing some other innovative things with a facility. So talk about all of that. What are you guys doing there?
Yeah, so Invisible Wounds Project, we officially started as a nonprofit here in Minnesota in 2018 with a mission to provide access to quality therapy services for military, police, fire, EMS, frontline medical staff, so nurses, hospital security staff, doctors, corrections officers, 911 dispatchers, and then also their families. And it was related to mental health, PTSD, and suicide issues. Basically work-related trauma, service-connected type of trauma. And we included families in that. I did that personally because I know this stuff doesn't just stay at work. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just stay on the battlefield. You have on the first responder side, or what we call the first responder side, which is everybody else that's not military, just for ease of purposes. Mm-hmm. You work a 12-hour shift, you deal with all kinds of stuff. You see, do, hear all kinds of stuff. Crappy stuff that the general public will never see. And then you have a 30-minute drive home, and now all this stuff you compartmentalize, and now you're around normal people and you try to be normal. It's impossible to not have that impact you and your family over the course of, in my case, 17 years. You have to have it. It impacts them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we work with people where the first responder themselves is not willing or able to accept or see that they need help, but the family members are. They need the help. They need that support. So when we started out, we basically would connect people just directly to therapy. We would, rather than them accessing their insurance, we just paid for their therapy. And that worked out well for a while so then COVID hit. Here in Minnesota, we had George Floyd riots. We had other civil unrest related to things here. And it was a hotbed. Plus, we had COVID, which was really deeply impactful to our medical community, which we serve, and not a lot of other organizations or people serve that crowd, right? We also had in 2018, we had 2 corrections officers die here locally. One was murdered, one died of a heart attack after a critical incident, and that had a deep, profound impact on the corrections within this area too. So we had kind of just a really big hotbed here. And by 2021, 2022, so 2022, we started seeing an influx. It takes a couple of years for people to start reaching out, right? Mm-hmm. So 2022, we had, at the beginning of it, we had 16 clients that we were paying for their therapy services. By the end of 22, in December, we had over 90.
Wow.
Per month. Mm-hmm. So it was just, the bills went from being manageable to being completely unmanageable. We spent, in a 15-month period, we spent $300,000 just paying for therapy. That was a significant amount. Mm-hmm. And we knew that was going to be completely unsustainable. We don't have government grants. Quite frankly, the government is not looking to spend money right now on mental health for first responders, not through organizations, really. So we have to do it through fundraising, and that was impossible to do. So we recognized that we needed to do something a little bit different. We also recognized that about 90% of those that we were helping already had the insurance that was taken by their provider that they were seeing. So rather than being a new insurance company, which I didn't really have any interest in starting that, we realized that people were coming to us more for the fact that we had good therapists who could get them in, that were qualified to work with, our people. They didn't want to test the waters and go to Google and say, well, I'm looking for a therapist in the area and then they get somebody that has no idea or understanding of what it means to be dealing with the trauma that our folks deal with. Mm-hmm. Because it is a different trauma than what someone else is dealing with off of the street that has not been a first responder, not been a veteran. There's a different level of trauma. There's different parts of that. Mm-hmm. So, we then kind of in the beginning of 2023, we took that and we said, we need to do something different. And that support ahead of the crisis is what's critically important. Mm-hmm. We had a woodworking shop that we were doing stuff with, and we saw profound, positive impact from that. People going in, they were going to therapy and they were doing things like that, but they were still isolating because they would be at home, isolated in their home. They'd go to therapy 1 hour a week and see their therapist, or they were just doing it virtually. And then they'd just drive home and they'd be at home again alone, or in their garage. They weren't interacting with friends. Their hobbies that they used to have were no longer, they were shut off. And I mean, COVID had a lot to do with some of that too, right? You couldn't do certain things. Sure. So that was just a catalyst. But we realized that we wanted to do something completely different. We looked at resources. We have inpatient services available. We have homeless shelters available, things like that. But we don't really have anything for just day-to-day activities. I want to connect with other people in a healthy way and drop in and meet other people who are like me. They don't need to be inpatient. They don't need to be in a homeless shelter. They just need to connect with other people in a healthy manner. And so we started with the process of building out what is now the Invisible Wounds Project Support Center. It's an 11,000 square foot facility here in Forest Lake, Minnesota, and it has a woodworking shop. It has an art studio. It has a laser room where we create things on leather, wood, engraving, metal, glass, all that kind of stuff. But it has a community lounge that has a pool table, dartboard, TVs, bubble hockey, has a coffee bar. It's a spot where our people can go and connect with each other and just hang out and be without having to explain, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? Have you ever shot anyone? Have you ever you don't have to deal with any of that because everybody in this facility basically has been there, done that, or is still doing that. We have training, we have education, we have, piling people into just support services and knowing that there's resources out there. And then we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So if something already exists, well, we connect people to that. And we work together with other groups, whether it's a for-profit, a nonprofit, a government organization, we work together in this Invisible Wounds Project Support Center to make sure that people have the resources that are available to them. Do you have staff that runs it, or are they paid staff? Are they volunteers? What's that look like? It's a combination. So we're going to be opening here. We're doing soft opening here in June, full opening in July. So right now I'm the only full-time employee. I have a part-time intake person, but we're in the process of hiring additional staff as finances allow. We're doing this building, which is a $400,000 project based off of donors and fundraising.
Wow.
Currently, we do not have any government funding. I don't have some major grant out there from the government saying, here we go. I think something that I'm learning along the way is that some of these programs, and I knew this, some of these programs existed on the veteran side through the VA, but that was all prior to COVID. And once COVID hit, a lot of these services were also discontinued to veterans. Talking about certain day programs as far as, the woodworking shop, the art studio, those kinds of things. So I think 90% of who we work with right now are the first responder side. Or I should say 80% are first responder side, 10% family, 10% veteran. I think we're going to see a much greater influx of veterans than I originally anticipated. But we'll staff it with, paid staff and then a whole host of volunteers. So we have our wood shop is already staffed with a core group of volunteers. And then we're working on bringing on additional. Our art studio will be volunteer staff. We have great relationships with therapists. So my hope is to have, therapists be a part of what we're doing. Oftentimes we get referrals from therapists. So they're seeing a client, and then there's only so much therapy can do. They need that initial or that additional injection of life beyond just the therapy office. And that's,
it's interesting that you are looking at doing some of these creative arts, like a studio, like an art studio and a woodworking shop and all those things. In fact, just a couple episodes ago, episode number 35, for those of you who listen to the podcast, we had an art therapist on who talked about this very thing and how creative arts can really help kind of reprogram the brain in a way. And so I think that's interesting that you're actually providing a location, a facility that will facilitate those type of activities and events. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And one of the things with this too, we have another pretty large multi-use room that we can use for group exercise. We can use for, if we want to have a cornhole tournament, we can use it for that, but we're going to use it for education and training and that type of stuff. So like bringing people in to learn about what is going on is critically important. Understanding, just that group piece of it is so important. We kind of fell into the art space, right? I didn't really realize at the time how healing it was, but now I see through firsthand experience with our clients how that has been such a game changer. And then we were doing it off location. We had a space that we were renting, and once they sold their building and we no longer had access to that, we saw what a negative impact not having that had. And I look back at, we talked about it earlier on, you start to lose your hobbies and things that, are part of your identity. I used to, when I was struggling, I didn't hunt and fish and enjoy the outdoors the way I do now and the way I used to love it. You kind of silo as well into what your group is. If you're a dispatcher, you hang out with dispatchers. If you're a cop, you hang out with cops. If you're a firefighter, you hang out with firefighters. Nobody else understands me. And how we work, I call it cross-pollination. I'm sure there's therapists out there that have a more scientific term for what we do, but we bring people together from those different lines. And, we don't force them, but we nudge them into an area that might be uncomfortable for them, because we know through experience that uncomfortableness will lead to much greater growth. Versus if we just lock down and do what we've always done. If you always do what you always done, you always get what you always got. And
because we're so programmed just to do whatever's easiest, right?
Yeah.
We just always want to gravitate toward what's easy and what's comfortable.
Yep. One of the other great things, and we've been doing retreats prior to having this building. but it's certainly a lot harder when you have to find a place to go do the retreat. You have to find the staff. You have to find, okay, the resources and tie it all together versus I envision this center having, 1-day retreats, 2-day, 3-day retreats, and then, providing opportunities for housing off location. We're close to multiple places that would be perfect for that. But being able to do, different aspects throughout the day and bring that into one spot.
So your facility opens, you said the soft opening in June, sometime in June, then kind of a harder opening in July.
Yeah.
So what are you expecting?
Grand opening will be July 8th.
Okay. So what are you expecting to see when people walk in the door? What are you hoping for this to turn into?
I'm hoping I envision this as it's a community center for all of those that we serve, with a lot of different resources that they can access. Our mission is to positively impact and enhance the lives of those who serve or have served. It's connecting. What I see is just so healing is that connection to other people who understand them and it's done in a positive way. On the veteran side, you've got the VFW, you've got the Legion, you've got those things. However,
I want to speak to that just
are
briefly. I don't want to throw shade on those organizations, but a lot of their facilities are based around the bar.
Right.
All those places have the bar, and that's what their focus is. And so, is that the best way to do these things?
Right. And we do a lot of things. I mean, we have great partnerships and we have great support from the Legions and VFWs, but they will also tell you, I think, as well, that, there's other issues there's other things that are needed. And, the way we're going about it is different. And it's a healthier, it's just a healthier environment that way. It's going to lead to conversations. And we're going to be able to help guide those conversations to go in a positive manner. This isn't going to be a place where people come in and are going to be able to just sit and complain and gripe about everything that's gone wrong and how it is, how life's handed them, lemons. And because honestly, we've all been there. Nobody's coming into this. Everybody who's been a veteran or first responder or dealt with that, they've all had they've all had to eat the crap sandwich at some point. Okay. Some of us it's been the dollar sandwich. Some of us it's been the 6-foot sub. And part of what is so beautiful about what happens when you bring those people together is they all have a different experience, but it's also all connected. And you see, hey, if this person can make it out and this person is succeeding, I can do it too. It's a lot like a recovery group. You go into a recovery group where there's 12 people. One person's been sober for 27 years. This person over here, it's their second day of sobriety, right? And you're walking in and you've been sober for 2 months. Well, I'm not as good as that person over there, but I'm not as bad as this one over here right now. And it's an opportunity to give hope and provide light to people that there's a chance to do something different. And that, our slogan is, "You are not alone." I know a lot of other organizations and places have that now as well, but that's always been our slogan is, "You are not alone." And you're not alone. I mean, we're pretty protective of our clients and don't broadcast, all the deep, dark things that people are dealing with, but it's not uncommon for us to have, a suicidal person once a week. But it's also not uncommon then to have somebody who has made huge strides in where they were to where they are now. And so our goal too is to provide that kind of a mentorship piece of it where we pair that person who is now 3-4 years into, past their, traumas and critical incidents and past their crisis point, to now they're able to help out that next one in line.
Is there any other facility like this in the country that kind of serves
I haven't
this
found anything
population?
like this in the world. I haven't found anything like this anywhere. So our goal is really to get this one up and running and really determine, how does it work? We don't truly have a model that we can say, well, this is what it's got to be.
Sure.
We're looking a little bit at the veteran side of things, but even that still doesn't totally apply. So we're figuring that out. And we continue to adapt and change to what we think is going to work, and then trial and continue to move forward until we can, get it done well. There was a time years ago, I would say 3 years ago, where, all right, we're going to have this region, that region, and this region, and this one, and we're going to do all these things in all these places. Well, you can't be everything to everyone everywhere.
Yeah.
One, it's really expensive. Two, it's almost impossible to staff. And we learned the hard way. And that sometimes meant letting people down, which, kills me to do that. And nobody wants to let anybody down, and certainly not me, and certainly not anybody with our organization. But sometimes you try things and you're like, okay, this is clearly not working. And then, so you have to shift. And I think where we've shifted, is what we're finding is it's badly needed. It doesn't exist. And we're going to be able to do something different that's going to impact far more people in a really positive light that otherwise doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I'd love to perfect it here and take it elsewhere.
Very cool. So where can people find you? Where can they learn more information about all of this?
You can go to our website, which is iwproject.org. And that's the easiest way to go. Check out our about us. We have some stories of hope on there that are really, really good to see. Like I said, we don't put a lot of our people out on video or film, but we have 5 or 6 videos up there, and those are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we had already this year, we're close to 200 intakes. And I really think once the center opens, we're going to see way more people than that.
Very good. Well, Russ, this is amazing work that you're doing. And I think you've found your new purpose and your new future. And I think I don't think you'll have any shortage of people that you can help. And
and I'm really excited about the future. And I know we've only met virtually, but I know hopefully we got something coming up here this fall that we can put together and have you out here and see the facility, and we'll do some training with some people too. So
yeah, I'd love to do that. That'd be wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being on the program today, Russ. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to connecting with you again and seeing you in person up in Minnesota.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for all you do too, Conrad.
Absolutely. Thanks, Russ, for joining me today on the podcast. I really appreciate what you're doing for your community and for the first responders there. And you, listener, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And remember, you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Be sure to tune in next week for another interview with an amazing first responder leader. Until then, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.